And neither of these gentlemen need any more introduction, so I'll let you get on with it. And have a very good afternoon.
Thank you, Hannu. Thank you, Björkbacka, and welcome also on my behalf. It's a great pleasure. And Terence Davies, we last met in Sodankylä beyond the polar circle in the midnight sun 6 years ago, and you gave a wonderful morning discussion with Peter van Baak, who unfortunately is no longer with us, but his spirit will remain. But for those who were not there, the morning discussion has been, the contents have been published in Filmihulu magazine in issue 4 in 2010, warmly recommended. And I'll just repeat two major points of that discussion, namely the classic Sodankylä questions. The first film you saw, I think you answered Singing in the Rain. And the Desert Island film, I think you answered Kind Hearts and Coronets. Classic evening comedy with Alec Guinness. These choices may come as a surprise to some of people who have seen your films, which are in a bit different register. Because your career until then was so well covered then, I thought we could today focus on Sunset Song and A Quiet Passion, the two new films, terrific films which are shown in this festival. And it's a very nice thing to notice that when you were in Sodankylä, do you know the Finnish word called sisu? Sisu means perseverance, stamina, never giving up. And I thought you are a person who needs a great deal of that. And you did. Because the British film industry had not been very kind to you at that point, but then the tables have turned and you have directed 3 wonderful films after that, The Deep Blue Sea and Sunset Song and A Quiet Passion. So it's a very happy thing to welcome you in these circumstances today. And the word will be free. I have an agenda of questions which I can follow, but do ask questions at any point of time, because I think that's what you would like to. Yes. So feel free to interrupt at any moment. I thought we could start with Sunset Song, and perhaps finding some similarities between these two films you have made. And they are very, very different films, and yet there are inner connections which are very important. And the most obvious one is, of course, that both protagonists who are women who are young, at least in the beginning they are young and seem fragile, but they have a great deal of sisu too.
I was drawn to the stories before anything else. They just happened to be about women. And one of the things that I do find, whether it's a woman or a man in any story, that they have courage to go on. I find that the most moving thing of all. That really goes back to my mother, who had a very hard life because my father was extremely violent. And she never ever became bitter. She never became angry. Her attitude was, these are the cards you are given, and that's what you do in life. And I think, in a way, both the characters in both of these films do that. There's an implied hope at the end of Sunset Song, because we see her smile. That's the last thing we see, because her function there is to forgive all suffering, including her own. At the end of the Emily Dickinson, it's much darker because she's basically surrendering to death and doesn't really know whether anybody will find her verse interesting or lasting. And it's a kind of plea and an acceptance. And when I see that, I'm just always moved in any story, because that part of people is the best part of the human condition, to hope and not to despair. Despair is worse than pain.
And Emily Dickinson had the power of spirit, and she became one of the greatest poets in world literature. In that sense, she was a very...
Yes, but the tragedy is that she wasn't well known during her lifetime, and to be working on poetry, which is some of the greatest poetry written in English, and for no one to know, I mean, that's just, it's awful. And I warned her for that reason, not just because she's a genius, because she is, but because that happened. And she kept on writing. It's one of the reasons I like the symphonies of Anton Bruckner, because he did the same. You know, he only had one success, the 8th Symphony, and the rest didn't do very much. And it was only 60 years after his death, he started to get played in Europe. And ironically enough, Bruckner, like Sibelius, is loved in England. I mean, they are absolutely adored. So I have in my heart, when people don't do well when they should have done, I feel that I think that's awful. Especially when you look around their own period and you see the people who were popular, and that in the case of Emily, all that verse has been forgotten. Nobody reads it now. I mean, I doubt very much if anybody reads Longfellow. Even in America, I said to the people from Amherst, you know, do they still read Longfellow? And she said, well, only the writer Paul Revere, but little else. Because I was brought up, God knows why, in a working class primary school, we had to learn huge chunks of the higher Waffa. I mean, God knows why. But because it's got this very constant octosyllabic rhyme, you can't forget it. By the shores of Gitchigumi, by the shining big sea water, stood the women of Nokomis, daughter of behind her rose the forest, rose the black and gloomy pine trees, and far longer than Wagner. Without any of the jokes. But you can still remember it. But great poetry is, you may not be able to remember it intellectually, but you remember it emotionally. You never forget it. Even if you can't recite it, doesn't matter. You can always go back to it and read it. But that's what moves me more than anything else, I think.
To return to Sunset Song, it's based on a classic Scottish novel by who is Grasset Gibbon. He's an author who has never been translated into Finnish. Could you say something about him?
Well, he was a Scottish writer who died in 1935. Aged 40, he was 34, almost young as Mozart. And he wrote this trilogy of novels called The Scots Quair, Sunset Song, Cloud Howl, and Grey Granite. And in 1971, on a Sunday night on BBC television, they always did a classic serial, and it was a 6-week, 40-minute sections. And I'd never heard of it before. And I watched the first episode, and I waited every single week for the next episode, because you couldn't record anything then. And I went out and bought the book. I didn't buy the full trilogy, I just bought Sunset Song. It's quite difficult to read because of his style, and he uses the Doric accent, which is from around Aberdeenshire. And it's quite hard going at the beginning. But once you start reading it, you can't stop. Some of my friends said, I've tried, it's just so boring, I can't possibly read it. Other people persevere and are rewarded. But again, it's because, you know, his work is not translated to the general public. And lots of people in the rest of Britain have never heard of him, let alone abroad. it's such a great work for a man to write this story about a girl who's only 14 when it begins, and she's only 21 when it's over. And the most extraordinary journey has happened in that time, to someone who's very, very young. Again, he died of peritonitis in 1934, and we shot some scenes in Scotland. We went for all the summer shots. We had to go somewhere where you could rely on sun, because you can't rely on sun in Scotland. So we went to New Zealand, and we got there, and they'd have the worst rains they'd had for 50 years. I thought, why didn't I stay at home? I got this for free. Then the weather broke. For 3.5 days, it was just glorious. And we found this lovely farmer who said we could have a particular field of barley. And I'm not a rural person. I don't know what barley looks like. But it's got a very soft brown colour, very golden, really beautiful. So I said, let's do it in that. We had one field that we could use. And there's a scene where all the town from Kinrady go to church, they go to church on this day. And I had them walking through the field. And someone said, well, farming people wouldn't walk through a field. And I said, yes, but that's poetic license. A kind of desperate attempt to justify it. But it did, I said, it does look lovely. There's people drifting down into the end of the field. They were all extras from New Zealand, and they were really lovely. One of them was a man of 90 years old. I said, are you all right? Are you sure you can walk down this hill? He said, yes, I can. They were lovely, but that's why we had to go there. And we didn't have enough money also.
The cinematography is magnificent. It's like the best films of David Lean, actually. It's something different than you have done before. I read that it has been even screened in IMAX theaters, your film, Sunset Song.
Well, then, digital still wasn't quite as good as it is now. It's incredible now. So we decided that we'd do all the exteriors on 65mm on film stock. And it does look lovely. I mean, my usual cameraman called Florian Hofmeister, who was an absolute genius, I think, couldn't do it. He was doing something else. So I asked Michael McDowell, who is equally a huge artist, and he comes from Scotland, and he knew the book. And after we shot it, he said, "Give me a look." He said, "This is the film I have been born to make." He's just lovely, but a wonderful eye, and full of passion. When I met him, he said, I always make a film filter of my own, and he took it out back and said, and I've made this one, and it was so touching. I just knew he was right. But one's very, very lucky to find people who care about what they do. It makes a huge difference. You can't know the difference. And everyone, was fully behind us, but cast and crew, the Bond people, who can usually stop a film like that, if they so desire, because we really did not have enough money. And they were so supportive of us. But the reason it took so long to finish, I was able to do A Quiet Passion in the meantime. The post-production was, little bits of money, getting it every now and then. And that was, it does sort of exhaust you, and does sort of get you down. Because at the end of it you think, God, why can't it just be easy? But I did A Quiet Passion, and there wasn't a single problem anywhere. It went like a dream. So perhaps God was giving me a little bit of a present.
It looks like a big budget film, Sunset Song, though. So you made miracles with what you had.
Well, you've got to prepare. I mean, I always do prepare. I write it as I see it, so that every track, pan, dissolve, everything is written in, including copyright material. Because if sequences are planned to a piece of music or a piece of poetry that is copyright, it has got to be cleared. And I say, you've got to do this straight away. Because if we can't get clearance then we've got no sequence, because I have no idea what else I'm going to put in there. So that's always a problem. And certainly on our time in the city, I mean, there were two areas of copyright. The Folks Who Live on the Hill, which was sung by Peggy Lee, her estate never got back to us, and it was really, really working. And then finally, about a week before we were supposed to do the final dub, they got back to us and they said, yes, you can use it. So I thought, well, the problem with copyright is now over. And someone said to me, well, actually, it's not over. You've used some T.S. Eliot, and in his will he said you can't use his poetry in a film because he thought the cinema was cheap and flashy. So I thought, oh God, so I wrote another begging letter saying, please, can we use it? It's some of the greatest poetry in English, which it is. And I said, but there is a precedence. Another poet called John Betjeman had used some of his poetry in a lovely program about poetry called Bird's Eye View. It went over all of Britain from the air and using different poems. And he used from four quartets. This is the death of earth. This is the death of fire. So I said it has been used. And then on the last day, when we were waiting, what do we do if they say no? They said yes, so we can actually dub it. But it's always a problem. But you've got to prepare. You've got to know what you want. Because two things arise from that. If the shot doesn't work, there's no point in spending hours trying to make it work. You know instinctively it's wrong. I've got to do something else. And when you know what the shots are before and afterwards, you can think, yes, oh, we could drop that two shot and go simply to this. Or we hold on this a little bit longer and drop the extra closer. But where craning is concerned, moving the camera on a crane or on tracks, you have got to know when you're going to do that. Because you've got to, then when you go through the shooting schedule, say, on that day we crane, on this day we need tracks for two shots, and on this day we need 45 extras, on this day we only need 10. That husbands what small resources you have, and then that starts you off on the right foot, as it were. But you've got to prepare. If you don't prepare, you're just asking for trouble.
Religion is a strong element in both films, in Sunset Song and A Quiet Passion. Storytelling, Protestant religion. Do you have a special relationship to that?
Well, these last producers, yes. Because after I finished The House of Mirth, no one would employ me. I didn't work for 10 years. I couldn't get anything off the ground. And they're called Roy Bolter and Sol Papadopoulos. Anyway, I was getting desperate and I thought, well, the career's over. And if the career's over, well, The House of Mirth is not a bad film to end on. I didn't know how I was going to make any money to live, but I thought, well, if it's over, it's over. And out of the blue, Sol Papadopoulos rang me and said, do you remember me? I said, well, yes, I do. I couldn't forget a name like that. But also, he was a stills photographer, and he took some beautiful stills of my mother, which I still got. I said, you know, these are really exquisite pictures. He said, well, I produce now, and there's this thing that's happening while Liverpool is the city of culture. They want to make 3 films set in Liverpool. Did I want to do one? I said, no. I said, I've done my Liverpool films. I don't want any more. Do any more. He says, well, I said, but, you know, how about a documentary? He said, yeah, that's a good idea. He said, I'll ring you back. Anyway, I was driving along the Thames Embankment with my manager, and I thought, oh, God, what have I agreed to? You know, I've never made a documentary before, so I'm going to say no. The car stopped at lights, and the telephone rang, and my manager said, it's Sol. And just before he gave the telephone to me, in the late 50s, there were a great deal of slum clearances all over England, and there was one in Liverpool. I don't know where it came from, but I thought, if we get footage of these buildings being pulled down and we play The Folks Who Live on the Hill, we've got a sequence and we've got a film. Literally, it literally happened like that. I said, we've got a film. I told him about the sequels. He said, yes, fine. He said, there's only one drawback. They're only funding 3 films, and there have been 157 applications. I said, well, you forget it. They're not going to give it to me. I've never made a documentary before. Why would they give it to me? Anyway, it was cut down to 100, then it was cut down to 50, then it was cut down to 25, then it was cut down to 24. Eventually, we were one of the 3. But it was very worrying for a while. And it was a tiny amount of money. We did it on £230,000, and most documentaries have at least £300,000. But I found, again, wonderful people who did wonderful jobs. I used a lot of footage, and there's a marvellous lad called Jim Anderson, who not only found all this material, but he got really good deals with whoever owned the copyright. And it was truly Neil who did the same with the music. I mean, incredible deals, for tiny amounts of money. And so we were able to put it together. But that's how my career was revived, really, by these 2 producers.
But I was asking about religion, but this was not. I thought you were coming to somehow religious revelation. But I was just asking about the films. Both have an element of religion. Sunset Song and White Passion, the puritanical Protestant thing.
Well, the reason I have religion in them is because I was brought up a Catholic, and I was very devout. I mean, I really was. When I got into my teens and realised I was gay, which was of course against the law in Britain, I became even more fervent. You know, I literally prayed until my knees bled. You know, and no comfort came. And I just thought it's a lie. At 22, I thought it's just a lie, and I gave up my religion. But yeah, I'm still full of those Catholic guilt. I'm still full of do's and don'ts. I examine my conscience every day. God knows why, because I haven't done any. I've never done any harm to them, as far as I know. But one of the things about Emily is the most important thing that she constantly asks herself and never really answers: is there a God? Is there not a God? Is there a soul or not? But if there's a soul and no God, what do you do? And that struggle went on for the whole of her life until she died, and she never really resolved it. And so I was drawn to that as well. In terms of Sunset Song, that's Scotland was very Calvinist. And so that sort of religion made people even harder than in Catholicism. Although in Britain, because Catholicism was a religion that was repressed for so long, we were basically told, in our little pocket of Liverpool, where a lot of Irish people had come over in the 1840s, that we were the sentinels, we were guarding the true religion. So it became slightly Calvinistic, but I responded to her spiritual journey, which was a very hard one.
In Finland, we can relate to that Scottish Protestantism because there are similarities in Finnish Protestantism in some areas, at least in the North Finland, for instance. And about Emily Dickinson, I got the feeling in your film that her relationship with God was much more profound than the ones that we represent in the official church, and that was the main cause of the lack of communication, that she was living in religion in a very deep level, and that sense one can get from her poems at least.
I don't think she felt that she had a relationship with God. I mean, it was sort of a given that there is God there. But what do you do if you question that? Is there one? I've got this thing called a soul, what do I do? So I don't think she had a relationship in that way with God. She had a relationship to what she felt was something eternal, but she doesn't really know what that is. And that's the struggle. I mean, it's much easier if you think there's a God up there. I say my prayers, I go to Mass, and I'll be all right. But she didn't view it like that. It was something much more amorphous than that, a sense of there being a greater being. But whatever it was, she didn't know. But her problem was always the same. How do you live morally and ethically, knowing that you're going to die and face extinction? And that is a struggle we all have, because one day, everybody in this room will be dead. That's a cheering thought.
The tragedy in Sunset Song is that at first we have the monster father who then dies, and then there's a very nice young man, and then there's the war, and there is the monster husband.
Well, and it's not explained in the book. Ewan, who's Chris's husband, is very loving. They love each other very much. Then he's called up to go to fight in the First World War, and it's not explained in the book either. He just goes away for training, and he comes back, and he's completely changed. And I said to the actor, I think the reason is that he's seen the casualty lists and is terrified. I mean, he's just terrified. In the first Battle of the Somme, 52,000 men were killed or injured on the British side alone. When the Battle of the Somme ended, the collective casualties were over 1 million. People were terrified, and he's terrified. And so he comes back, he doesn't know what to do. And obviously, when he's been away training, he has been out with other young men of his own age. He has probably gone to prostitutes, and he comes back completely changed. A lot of people find that very difficult to accept in the film. They say he's not redeemed at the end, and I think he is redeemed at the end, because what he says is, the reason I was going to desert is because I loved her and I wanted to go back to her and the farm. And I think that does redeem him. But there have been people who say, no, what he did was completely unacceptable, and there are no reasons, you can't excuse it. But the point of the whole ending of the book is that it is about forgiveness. Once you forgive, you are free of the past. If you constantly will not forgive, you're the prisoner of it. I found it very difficult to forgive my father for the way he treated not only my mother but us. And it was peculiar that one time, I don't know where I was, I just thought, it was somewhere in London, I thought, I don't hate him anymore. I don't love him, and I'm glad he died, but I can't take around with me this bitterness, because it just corrodes you, nobody else. And that's what it's about at the end. It's about forgiveness. And I think that's what's the major achievement of the novel.
Was your father a war veteran?
I'm sorry?
Was your father a war veteran?
Was my father?
Was he in the war, in the First War, or in the Second World War?
No. What happened was, he was obviously very disturbed. And in 1940, you had to go down to a central part of Liverpool to be registered. And he got his call-up papers. He went down, and whatever system he had to go through at one point, they said to him, you'll be going into the army. And he said, I want to go in the Navy. And whoever was dealing with him said, you'll go where you're told to go. And he just walked out. Anyway, 6 weeks later, he got his call-up papers, and it was for the army. And he threw them in the fire, burnt them. And about a month later, during the day, the local police and the military police came to take him away by force. And he locked all the doors. And there was a bottle about this big, full of disinfectant, and he just drank the whole lot. They took him to hospital, they pumped his stomach out of this, and when he came around, the military police said, why did you do it? He said, I told you, I go in the Navy or I don't go at all. And he didn't go to war. I think that's what began the cancer that eventually killed him. But I mean, when I think of what he got away with, selling wood during the war, and he said my eldest brother, my two elder sisters, when they were still at school to sell wood during the May bombings. I mean, it's scarcely credible now. It is scarcely credible. But that's what he did. And because of that, it's very difficult to forgive. But it's also, I now can't watch any kind of violence. If it's in a film, I just get up and go home. I cannot understand why people want to watch it. People blowing each other up or shooting at one another or torturing one another. I cannot understand it. It tells us nothing about the human condition except the obvious. People can be horrible. Guess what? We already know that, and to do it with a kind of drooling that I see in it anyway. I mean, someone sent me, I don't know where from, Pulp Fiction. I have to switch it up. This is so disgusting. The hatred that man must have for human beings is terrifying. If that's how you view the world, then I'd sooner be dead.
This war trauma, this war psychosis is something we are still learning to understand even in Finland, and there have been recently high-profile books on that phenomenon. Even a new film that was premiered here in this festival called Sodan Murtama, Broken by the War. No, what's the word? Broken by the War, yes. And it's going to have its premiere on Friday, the general premiere. So it's something we are dealing with still in Finland, because we had 3 very hard wars during the Second World War. Let's then continue with Quiet Passion, a quite different film from Sunset Song, and you shot it in America, in Massachusetts, and you said it was an easy shoot in comparison with Sunset Song. How was it to shoot it on location where Emily Dickinson lived?
No, we went to shoot outside the house, because you can't shoot inside the house because it's a museum now. And we couldn't have done it anyway, because when you're moving the camera around, you need to fly a wall, and we couldn't take any of the walls out. But we did use the garden. They used to be on television on a Sunday morning, a 15-minute little documentary about various people. And there was one, I was about 20, when I saw it one Sunday morning, and it was about Emily Dickinson, whom I'd never heard of, and Claire Bloom was reading her poetry, and it was because I could not stop for death. He kindly stopped for me. So I went out again and bought a little anthology of her poems, and there was a little précis about her life in the frontispiece. And I began reading them. And it was about 10 years ago, I started reading them, and I thought, this is an extraordinary life. I mean, it really is quite extraordinary. So I decided that I'd like to do a film about her. Because although she only ever left home once, she was 17 when she went to a seminary. It was only 10 miles from where she lived, but when it's by cart or by horse, it seems a long way away. And when I was growing up, I had to go away to North Wales because I had some infections in my chest. And it went away for a month. And I was so homesick, I can't tell you. I longed every single night to go home. I even toyed with the idea of running away, but I was only 10 and I didn't really have the courage, but I hated it. And coming back home was just such a joy, such a joy. And she couldn't bear being away from home. And when she came back, she was so glad that she wouldn't have to go back to the seminary. But she stayed there for the rest of her life. I think she was afraid of the world. And I think she was rather like me in a sense. I wanted my family to stay like that and never change. And I think she wants the same. But families do change. People die, they go away, they have children, they change. But so I know what that feeling's like. Because all of us, I think, want to be part of the Smith family in Mimi and St. Louis. We all do. And if you haven't seen it, see it. But it didn't, by her not going anywhere, it didn't stop her rich in her life. She had this, they read voraciously. They were very intelligent. And they did have a very, very rich life. It's just that she confined her life to that house, and to that family.
It's a chamber play, more this newer film of yours, and it has a completely different visual style, and it somehow reminds me of a Danish painter called Wilhelm Hammershøi. Are you familiar with him?
Oh yes, yes. That was a great revelation to me as well. When we were setting up, Andy Harris, who was the production designer on Sansason, said, "Have you heard of Hammershøi?" And I said, "No, I haven't." He said, "Well, he's a Danish painter, a Danish painter active at the end of the 19th century, early 20th. I said, "Well, if you've got any of his paintings, can you show them to me?" So he said, "Yes, yeah, I've got a book." And they look like Vermeer, who is my favourite painter, but it's got this smudged light, and they're of rooms with the doors open and nobody in them, windows open to almost to nothing, and in a courtyard. And when there is a subject it's always a woman, usually with her back to the viewer. They have the most extraordinary stillness about them, but they have a melancholy about them, particularly the ones with no one in them. And I said, "Oh yes, it's got to look like that. We've got to make it look like that." and Michael did. But he was a great revelation to me.
Still, there's a very strong human presence, even when there's nobody visible.
Yes, but that's what's so moving about them. You feel there's nothing sadder, I think, though, than empty rooms where people have been. And they may have only gone out to get a cup of tea, or it doesn't matter. There's something sad about the fact that these were rooms in which were inhabited and no longer are. I just find that extraordinary.
For the leading role, you cast Cynthia Nixon, best known for us for her one of the main roles in Sex and the City. How did you?
Well, I'd seen her in New York about a film which didn't come off, but I'd not forgotten her name and her face. She's got a wonderful face. So when I was writing the Emily Dickinson, I thought, I think she'd be really good. So I went over to see her in New York, and I said, "Look, I've got to be honest. I've only watched Sex and the City once, and then with the sound down." She didn't take offence. I said, "Well, why did you do that?" I said, "Well, because your reaction shots are always the truest. They really were. They're very true." And I said, "We also found the only photograph of Emily, which was taken when she was 17. And I'd said to Saul, "Will you superimpose Cynthia's face on to this photograph?" And they looked exactly the same. Anyway, I said to the scriptwriter, I said, "Will you do it?" She said yes. And she stuck with it for 4 years. It took 4 years to get off the ground. And she stayed with it, which is very, very loyal. But I think she gives a knockout performance. Because I say to all my actors on all the films, I don't want you to act. Don't start acting. Because it's never believable. Because what most people do now is just give you a collection of mannerisms, and who cares? Why bother watching that? So being is different, because the actors then do things that they're not aware of, that film captures. It captures the fleeting moment, and someone does a hand gesture or looks in the wrong way, and it brings it alive.
She's a very good actress also in this role, very versatile, and she had started very young, so when she's this good at this point of her career, we can predict a long career for her, an interesting career. We have recently been screening Douglas Sirk melodramas in Orion with Barbara Stanwyck, who at the age of 15 found another aspect in her, and she continued 30 years more. So this I think she belongs to this special class of actors who are not just young and beautiful, but who have a strong personality.
Yes, but you still get the same argument from people who put money in, can't we have a name? And I said, well, the problem with names is that what if they don't give the right performance? And who are you going to fire? You're going to fire me, not the name. I said, that's not on. I'm sorry, I'm not prepared to take that risk. And also, I've got no time for this nonsense about their names and they've got to be treated as if they're gods. Well, they're not. You know, I'd be very short-tempered with that kind of nonsense. In fact, someone who should be named as in one of the early films who was an American. The moment's gone. And I said, well, it's your job to recapture it. That's what you'll pay. It's not a cure for cancer. It's not mining coal. It's your job. I did, for 12 years, I did a job as a bookkeeper. I loathed it. But if I had turned up at the office and said to my boss, I feel a bit frail today, he said, well, go home and stay there. So this is your job. And you get a lot of sulking. That. And you think, oh dear, you know, breathe into this plastic bag. You won't feel a thing.
Jennifer Eel is also very good as the sister of Emily.
Sorry?
Jennifer Eel, or how do you pronounce the name of the actress who plays the sister of Emily Dickinson?
Oh, it's Erla. It's Erla.
Really? Okay, sorry.
And that woman is radiant. I mean, that woman is just radiant. And I'd seen her many years ago for this film that didn't come off. And when I was writing Vinny, I thought, oh, I wonder if she's available. I wonder what she'd do it. Anyway, we went to Los Angeles, and as soon as she started saying to American agents, they've got to read, well, they won't do it. It's funny, then there's no point in sending them in, because if they won't read, then I won't cast them. There's only one person who's in every film that doesn't have to read, that's usually the lead. Everyone else has got to. But she came in, and as soon as she walked in the door, and I don't know where it comes from, you just think, I found her. And I had a lot of people to see that day, and so you can't let them know. But I would have loved to have said to her, you know, of course it's you. I think she knew. But she's quite radiant. I mean, in real life too. And it's a radiant performance. But I did say to both of them, when you argue, you've really got to go for one another. Because in families, and I'm from a large family, so I know it's true, when you fall out with one of your siblings, and the gloves are off, you don't care what you say. So it's got to be like that. And funny enough, Cynthia said she found those scenes the most difficult. The dying scenes were, dead easy. Unbelievable. But what's wonderful about all actors, and I do find this extraordinary, is that in A Quiet Passion, the mother dies. And my mother was the love of my life. And this particular take, I couldn't speak. I couldn't stop crying. I could not speak. And I said to my producer, will you go out onto the set? Say cut. I said, I can't go outside. They said cut. And the monitor was still on. And the three of them went like this. Would you like another one? I said, of course not. I've been so moved by what you've done. But the fact that they were going to do it again, extraordinary.
Music is also important in A Quiet Passion. It's kind of a transforming thing in the coming-of-age story of Emily. Can you tell more about your choice of music for this film?
Well, most of the music comes when I write it, but one thing that is very important is the greatest influence of all was American musicals. Because my sisters loved American musicals, and of course I did as well. They took me to see, when I was 7, Singing in the Rain. I mean, what a wonderful introduction for anybody. So music's always been very important, but it has to emerge from you organically. You have to know where it is, and not just put music in, to fill time. Sounds is very often much better. So we've chosen the music that I'd already chosen, and some things that we found later. For instance, Emily was a very good pianist, and she could improvise on the piano. But she used to play a particular song called "Alone, I'm All Alone," which has got this rather plaintive Victorian quality to it. So we got that, and we had her play that. But at the end it needed something. It was already written, but it needed something. And I didn't really know what. And then I remembered Charles Ives, who is a minor American composer, who wrote two really good things, I think, Central Park in the Dark and The Unanswered Question. He wrote symphonies, but the symphonies are, I have to say, a bit silly. But I have a soft spot for Charles Ives, because he married someone called Melody Twitchett. You've got to love someone. Anyway, The Unanswered Question begins on strings with interpolations from woodwind and flute. And we recorded the strings on these interpolations separately. And we laid it on the track, and I said, what would happen if we took out the interpolations from the flute and the woodwind? We took it out, and what you get is this very mysterious, moving sound, as if the strings are trying to find their home key, rather like the opening of the Shostakovich 10th Symphony, which is the same. It's not quite sure where it's going, and that makes it mysterious. But there was a practical thing that you don't, because I'm not a musician, you come up against. They had these very peculiar pianos in the 1850s where the board is like this and the strings are laid along like this, but the sound is really tinny. It's really awful. And I said, well, no, we've got to have 2, 3 times where there's a piano. It's just awful to listen to. I said, well, look, we'll have to use a concert ground, a baby ground. We'll have to, because the tone is so much more beautiful. And I was expecting people to say, it didn't sound like that in 1857. And I would have no defense against that. But a modern piano is just so rich, so much richer. That's why they play all Bach on pianos and not harpsichords. So it was those kinds of things. But when you find the right piece of music, even if it's before or after, there's something thrilling putting it on and thinking, yeah, it's right. But music is very important. When it's used well, it's utterly fabulous. When it's not, it's a real intrusion. And as I said, I think the greatest example of that is Psycho. Without that music, that film would be not half as good. I mean, and it was scored only for string orchestra. And the one that's part of it, that's really marvelous, when Arbogast goes into the house, and we come back, and it's just strings with their mutes on, this shimmering sound, and it is so chilling. That's when it's really used marvelously.
But also in the beginning of A Quiet Person, I think the film is about the search for transcendence, and about something that is beyond. And there's a false start with the official church religion, that is the false search for the beyond. But then there's the opera scene, which is the real discovery of something that is beyond our everyday life. Is it Bellini? I don't know what it is. That is being Sonnambula.
Yes, it's Bellini. It's La Sonnambula.
La Sonnambula, yeah. The sleepwalker.
They went to a Jenny Lind concert. And when she left the seminary, she went to a Jenny Lind concert. And I said, well, could you find the program for Jenny? And then that's what we performed. But it was really peculiar. Things like, there's no place like home. Why on earth is she singing that? And others which I'd never heard of, which are incredibly dull. But she did sing this aria from La Sonnambula, and I don't like bel canto, I have to be honest with you. All that running up and down the scales, you go, oh God, come to an end. But if we then make sure that that's a bit of nonsense, we come up into the 2 boxes where they are. I said, but the next one has to be Schubert, Nacht und Träume. It just has to be that. Only a bit of it, but it's got to be that. So that it's reprieved at the 3/4 of the way through the film, when the woman that her brother has an affair with, she plays it. And it's a wonderful song. I mean, it's Schubert's greatest, I think. And that wonderful rocking rhythm. it's just fabulous. So I certainly didn't want to, there's no place like home in. But those things sort of come to you. They may come before, hopefully before, because then you've got to clear them. But afterwards, sometimes it's wonderful to find something that you hadn't thought of, or you extend something. I mean, like in one of the early cuts, before we go to hear the singer, it was cut from the father and the brother. Yes, we're taking you home. Pause. Cut. The song begins, and the editor said to me, "Can I put the piano in just before we cut?" And it transformed it. It suddenly made it all of the whole. I said, "Yes, of course you can. Of course put it in." Now, I'm not going to say no, but a tiny thing like that can make a difference. A tiny thing like that.
It occurred to me that there's an affinity with another story that takes place in America during the Civil War, namely Little Women, where Louisa Alcott, her transformation takes place also at the opera here in Bel Canto. That is Donizetti, Luciani, Lammermoor, but that must have been an unconscious coincidence.
Which version of Little Women are you talking about?
I remember the film versions.
I like the second one, which is with June Allison.
I think I'm thinking about the 30th version.
It's the second one. It's with June Allison, and it's fabulous, fabulous three-strip Technicolor. It's exquisite to look at. It's not the greatest film ever made, but God, it's gorgeous to look at.
The similarities that they're both about young women who are on their way to become great authors.
You think there's a connection?
Louisa Alcott and Emily Dickinson, and in the same time, in the same decade.
Well, alas, I didn't get June Allison, but I don't care.
Anyway, we started with Sisu, and sometimes in Finland say that you need to know 3 words in Finland. Those are Sisu, Sauna, and Sibelius. We'll skip Sauna now, but how about Sibelius?
I tell you, I was about 19 or 20, and I was going to this drama club. And I got friendly with this other lad called Philip. He said, "Well, let's meet on Sunday and play some records." And those days you could get the records from the library. And I went up on the Sunday, and it was the Bruckner 8th Symphony and the Sibelius 5. When the Sibelius ended, I didn't come down for about 3 weeks. It is so electrifying, just electrifying. It was a revelation. And so was the Bruckner. They're now my great loves. Those are the only 2 symphonic cycles worth listening to. Forget the rest of them. But it was so powerful. So I collected all the symphonies and the Lemminkainen Legends and Blokkeler's Daughter and all that. And some of his songs are really rather lovely, but they're not that well known. They're very, very beautiful. But I fell in love straight away. And yesterday we went to the public library, the National Library, and they brought out the score of the 5th Symphony, and they let me hold it. I thought, God, I'm holding something that this is what Sibelius wrote. You know, he wrote this. I'll never forget it. It's been one of my greatest things to do, to come here and see. Angela, but also what touched me, the manuscript. I'm going to Vienna because I also want to do the same to Bruckner, so I can pay my homage to the great man. Those symphonies changed my life, I can tell you. But the only drawback, because it was the first, 5 was the first I ever heard. I said to a librarian, at the end, where are the silences marked? And he showed me what the silence. I said, but he doesn't indicate the length of silence. And if you get it wrong, it doesn't work. If they play too slow, you think, no, it's wrong. They play too fast. You think, no, it's wrong. And I went to a concert that Simon Rattle was giving as a guest conductor at the Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra. That's where he started. And it was Symphony No. 5. And it was a wonderful performance. And we got to the end, and it just wasn't right. You think, why can't you get it right? That's what you're paid for. But when it's right, it is so electrifying. I think, but the other one that my favourite is the seventh. When I first heard that, and the way it ends, dum-dum, I was sitting in my seat in the concert hall, and I couldn't stop crying. And this woman said, "Are you all right?" I said, I know it's absurd, but I don't know what it is. Every time I hear that final chord, it's as though everything has been said. There's nothing left to say now except silence. Oh, God, it's just, they're wonderful symphonies. Wonderful, wonderful symphonies. Thank you, Finland.
Thank you, Terence. But before we stop, I think there's a little time for questions if somebody wants to ask. Please.
Speaking of music, there's that amazing sequence in The Long Day Closes in which the camera kind of glides along the street and over the church pews, and it's all set to this song from this 50s, I think, musical called Tammy and the Bachelor, and it's a wonderful use of music. I was wondering if you could tell something about your relationship to that piece of music and that film.
Well, I was taken to see Tammy and the Bachelor, and I remember where I saw it, the seat I took in the route I took to get home, and at the end of it, it's Tammy's in love. And it's a terrible lyric, I'd sing like a violin if I were in his arms, oh dear. But the tune, it's about yearning, that's its subtext. And I had to, what I wanted to do at the end of Long Day Closes was say, show what the parameters of my life were. There were the house, the street, school, and movies. That was it. I thought, well, how can I do that where they're all combined together? How can I do that? And I don't know where it came from. But I thought if I do them all overhead, all travelling at the same, left to right all the time, but coming back, left to right, so it's a complete circle. And I thought, I remembered, I'd sing like a violin if I were in his arms. Well, that's got to go on. Because when you use sentimental music for a non-sentimental reason, it somehow takes on something a little more moving. And I don't know where it came from. And I remember when I was writing it, standing with bits of paper, and I was going like this, and the other way around. It'll work, I said to myself. It was, apart from coming back to the street, the three shots that were inside were all in the same room. We just redressed it, because we couldn't afford three separate sets, so we just redressed it. But no, I've got a soft spot for Tammy. Please.
Yeah, I could continue on from that one, from that question. There seems to be, in Long Day Closes, this idea you're sort of equating the theater, cinematic theater, and then church with each other. There almost seems to be a transition that cinema became a kind of church for you later on in your life. I wonder if you could elaborate on that, or am I on the right track at all after you abandoned your religion?
Well, when I was growing up, I was very fervid. I really was a good Catholic, more fool me. And when I went to the pictures, I thought that what I saw was real. I didn't know about shooting things inside sound studios and all that. None of us knew. In fact, a lot of ordinary people didn't know. They thought that, oh, that's what it's like. And so it became like religion for me. And when I gave up my religion, it became even more important. Not that I thought it was real, but to try and respond to what I loved. And when I started making my own, I tried to make it as truthful as possible. But it felt like a religion. It just felt like a religion. So much so that if anyone spoke near me, I'd get really angry. Because those days you didn't have any to eat until the interval. But if people spoke, I used to go berserk. I went to see Night of the Hunter in London when I first came down to go to film school. and this woman in front of me was explaining the plot. And I hit her on the head. I said, look, if they're too stupid to understand it, stay at home and aim for the other performance. And shut up, I become murderous. Sometimes I've got a breather here. Well, people have got to breathe, haven't they? Sometimes.
On a more frivolous note, I noticed in the music credits for A Quiet Passion, Eric Idle's name. Can you explain that?
Yes, well, apparently he holds the copyright. God knows why. Because when I first saw it, I thought, he isn't in the film. Now, apparently he owns the copyright.
For what?
Yes, for that particular song. So, we had to clear it.
Thank you, Terence. And go see the films Sunset Song and A Quiet Passion. They are really great. Thank you very much.